So, very first, the iconic, beloved Blackbird. It needs to be bloody. Noel sat backward on his chair, its straight back between his splayed legs. In spite of the chair's cheap tan plastic and the rest of the room's less than upscale ambience, Noel managed to look cool and confident. Sam wondered how he pulled that off so easily. Feeling like the nerd that he was, Sam tried to adjust his long legs to fit another of the cheap plastic chairs. He disagreed with Noel. Horror's not in the blood, it's in the creep factor. Creep factor, Noel repeated. It's a technical term. Noel nodded. I must have dozed off when Grimley was talking about that. More likely you were staring at Darla Stewart. You make a point, and we're not getting anywhere. Sam sighed and shifted in his seat again. His legs were cramping. He was hungry, and he was pretty sure he and Noel were the only pair in the room who hadn't come up with an idea yet. Although Sam's back was to the rest of the space, he could hear the jumble of 8 hushed conversations going on all over the gray-walled room. The classroom had little to muffle the intense babble: a few folding chairs, some plastic chairs, a portable closet packed with sound equipment, and a viewing screen. Through an open door behind Noel, Sam could see the project room, which had open space for filming scenes, a green screen, and several shelves stuffed full of more AV equipment. The conversations between Sam's classmates were mostly incomprehensible because they were taking place in cautious whispers and mumbles, lest a brilliant idea get stolen. Occasionally, though, someone would get excited and Sam could make out a word: serial killer, zombie, vampire, rapist, demon. The words he heard drained some of the tension from his shoulders. If those were the other team's ideas, maybe he and Noel still had a chance. They didn't have an idea yet, but at least they didn't have a done-to-death idea. You have to admit she was a fine caboose, Noel said. Sam stretched all 37 inches of his legs and stared at his huge feet. Both Sam's legs and his feet defied the normal proportions that should have gone with his 6'5" body. According to a chart his doctor showed him once, his legs should have been about 34.5 inches long. You wouldn't think 2.5 extra inches would be much, wink, but apparently they were enough to make Sam look like a stork, or a heron, or a crane. He heard all three from various unkind kids. And those inches were enough to make him prone to grand displays of ungainly clumsiness, which prevented him from turning his height into something useful, like, say, on a basketball court. All Sam's legs did, as far as he could tell, was get in his way. Earth to Sam, huh? Looks like we're lagging here, dude. Noel gestured out into the room behind Sam's shoulders. Sam looked around. 4 teams were leaving the room. 2 were getting ready to leave. Only 2 other teams were still talking. Great. Actually, it was kind of great, Sam thought better in silence. He looked at his watch. The classroom was open for another half hour. They had 30 minutes to come up with something. Would you get out of that chair? Noel flung his foot out and kicked the side of Sam's seat. You're squirming so much you remind me of my nephew when he needs to take a piss. I can't get comfortable. My heart bleeds. There you go with the blood again. Noel grinned. It's all about the blood. Seriously, we need to think. Hey! Noel's blasé posture disappeared. He glanced over at the remaining teams. Seriously, dude, get off the chair. Come over here. Noel exited his chair with unenviable grace, and he took a couple of steps to the wall behind him. Sliding down the wall, he folded his normal-length legs, perfectly proportioned for his 6'1" height, into a meditative position. He motioned to Sam again when Sam hesitated. So Sam gave up on the too small chair and awkwardly put his skinny body on the floor in front of Noel. He had to admit, his legs were happier. Noel leaned forward and spoke softly. Do you remember Freddy Fazbear's pizza? Noel's breath smelled like licorice. Sam leaned away. Well, sure, why? Noel lowered his voice into a whisper so faint Sam had trouble understanding him. All he heard was creepy animat, but that was enough. Oh, those! Sam felt goosebumps on his arms. He was glad he was wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt so Sam wouldn't see how the mention of the characters affected him. Thinking about pizza gave me the idea, Noel said. What idea? Noel gazed out over the classroom again. Sam checked it too. Only one other team was left. It was the infamous Darla, her fine caboose, and her friend Amber, who actually was the nice one of the 2 girls. They had their heads together and seemed to be having whispered disagreement. They weren't paying any attention to Noel and Sam. My idea is to write a horror story plot around a creepy animatronic of our own, Noel whispered to Sam. Sam, edgy from just thinking about Freddy Fazbear's animatronic characters, had to admit that was a great idea. I like it. Awesome. Noel held out a fist, and Sam bumped it. So, what would make a good character? Noel asked. You're asking me? You're the genius. Sam wasn't a genius, but he did get good grades. Some people, like Noel, who tended to be a bit of a screw-off, got those things confused. Sam leaned back and looked at his feet again. A good animatronic character. A good animatronic character. A good... Sam looked at his legs. Stork, heron, crane. How about a bird? Not a chick, obviously. Something more obviously intimidating. Hey, that's not bad. How about a goose? A goose? Sam repeated loudly. He laughed. Don't laugh. A goose attacked me when I was little. I still bear the scars. Seriously? Noel pulled up the left leg of his faded jeans. He pointed at a white scar below his knee. It bit you? Well, no. It chased me while I was on my bike. I fell off my bike and cut my knee. Sam laughed again. Noel dropped his pant leg. I'm sorry, Sam said. I can see you're traumatized. Noel stared blankly into the middle distance. You have no idea. I probably need therapy. I don't think I want to do a horror film about an animatronic goose, Sam said. You're right. We need the creep factor. What's a creepy bird? You guys win the rotten egg prize, Amber called from across the room. Saving the best for last, Noel said, holding his clasped hands above his head in a victory gesture. Amber laughed. You're an idiot. Darla said nothing, and the two girls left the room, talking about a poetry reading for their English class. She likes you, Sam said. She thinks I'm an idiot. She likes you, and she knows you. Noel kicked Sam's foot. Sam returned to the problem. Oh, I got it, he sat up and said in a solemn, ominous tone. Once upon a midnight dreary. Huh? Oh, come on, you're not that much of an idiot. I might be. Quoth the raven, Sam prompted. Oh, wait, I know this. That poem by the scary dude, Poe. Oh, a raven. Yeah, only no, not quite. The raven obviously is a cliche. A crow would be too. I'm thinking of a blackbird. It has the same connotation, but blackbirds are a little smaller. They're songbirds, and we actually have more of them in our area than we do crows or ravens. How do you know this stuff? I'm a genius, remember? No, I'd forgotten, because I'm an idiot. They both laughed. Okay, so we got a creepy blackbird, Noel said. Now what? Ever had one of them stare at you? Sam asked. I mean, really stare at you? There was one in the quad the other day. I was thinking about skipping Psych 201, and that bird kept looking at me, and I felt so guilty I went to class. Sam snapped his fingers. That's dumb, but I think you're onto something. What? Guilt. Idiot here, remember? You need to spell it out. Our animatronic, the Blackbird, Sam gave the name finger quotes, will get you to confess your darkest secrets, and when you do, it comes to punish you for your sins. It never lets you off the hook, never lets you rest. We can have the Blackbird basically hound some poor dude to death. Will there be blood? Noel asked. You're a ghoul. Sam chewed on his lower lip. Actually, a little blood might not be bad. If you prick us, do we not bleed? Wow, Sam said. You're quoting Shakespeare. Maybe your idiot thing is all an act. I'll never tell. The Blackbird will make you tell, Sam said with a wicked laugh. Sam and Noel finally finished plotting the movie just in time for their next class. Even though he was arguably too tall for the role, Sam thought it'd be fun to play the Blackbird. Noel, who honestly didn't want to dress up like a bird, said Sam's size would make the Blackbird even scarier. That left Noel with the part of the poor, beleaguered, guilty guy. I can do pathetic, Noel said proudly later that day as they shared a pizza. That you can, Sam agreed. When Noel and Sam were only halfway through their pepperoni and jalapeno pizza, Amber came into the brick-walled restaurant and spotted them. Do you have room for one more? She pointed at the black vinyl booth seat Noel sat on. Noel scooted over. Sure, but keep your mitts off our pizza. I don't want your stinking pizza, Amber said. Sam grinned at Amber as she flagged down a server and ordered a soda. So what's your movie about? She asked. Wouldn't you like to know? Noel said, eyes narrowed in suspicion. Amber sniffed. As if. I was just making conversation. What's yours about? It's about knitting. Her smirk said she was feeling pretty good about her project. Are you serious? Noel asked. Absolutely. Will there be blood? Noel asked. Sam laughed and shook his head. Plenty, Amber said. Noel pointed at Sam. See? Gotta have blood. Sam ignored him. The pizza place was crowded and noisy. Above the smells of spicy pepperoni, sausage, and tomato sauce, the small space thrummed with the beat of classic rock coming from overhead speakers. Sam waved to a few friends, then watched Amber watch Noel. Sam wasn't sure why Noel didn't ask Amber out. She was cute, not Sam's type. The few girls he'd gone out with were taller and more serious than Amber, but Noel liked girls he could laugh with, and girls seemed to like Noel's blue eyes, athlete's body, and scruffy blonde hair. Amber, also blonde, blue-eyed, and in good shape, looked good sitting next to Noel. She even dressed like he did, usually wearing faded jeans, white shirts, and, when the weather allowed it, leather jackets. Sam blinked when Amber leaned across the table, blowing the paper wrapping off the end of her straw and towards his face. "He told me your movie is about a bird. I think he's lying." Sam smiled. "Actually, he's not. You mean like the birds?" Noel snorted and waved a slice of pizza around. "We're not that derivative." "Ooh, big word," Amber said. Sam laughed. Actually, they were being a little derivative, weren't they? They were piggybacking off of Freddy Fazbear's pizza. The hair on the back of Sam's neck prickled. Why did that happen every time he thought of the place? Sam pulled out his wallet and threw some cash on the table. "I need to get started." "On what?" Amber asked. "We'll never tell," Noel said. Amber smacked his arm. Ah, Sam thought. True love. Many of Sam's classmates thought it was pathetic that he lived at home, but he loved it. First, he got along great with his parents, who were supportive and fun. Second, he had way more privacy and space than he'd have in a dorm. His parents had remodeled the basement into a sprawling apartment for him with his own kitchenette, bathroom, sleeping area, and a space for his film projects. And third, he liked getting away from the camps at the end of the day. He could only take so much of the constant chatter, scholastic and social angst, and the frantic pace. Besides, he had no use for partying. Working on his projects was more fun than drinking and acting like a moron. Sam's house was about 2 miles from the college, an easy distance to walk, which was good since he didn't have a car. He enjoyed the walk home, too. It followed the railroad tracks that ran along the top of a steep forested drop-off into a rocky trench and culvert that separated farmland from the college's expansive acreage. Sam liked to pretend he was in an old-timey vagabond, straggling along, waiting to hop a train to travel to faraway adventures. In fact, Sam was working on a screenplay about a freight hopper, set in the mid-20th century. He knew it was a tough lifestyle, but it held romantic appeal for him. Maybe because he never felt like he fit in with mainstream life. And of course his current project wasn't going to help with that. 3 days after Sam and Noel decided on their horror movie plot, Sam sat in the special-ordered desk chair his mom had gotten for him, at the huge craft table in the basement. Covering the pale blonde wood tables were piles and piles of long black feathers. Luckily, Sam's dad was a merchandiser who had a gift for finding rare items. He could locate pretty much anything Sam ever needed for his projects. Today his dad had met Sam in the driveway with several crates of feathers, which he'd helped Sam transport down to the basement stairs. Before leaving the basement, Sam's dad sang out, "Bye-bye, Blackbird." "Oh, very funny, Dad," Sam called up the stairs. He smiled at the answering chuckle and began pulling feathers from the crates. Sam's idea for the Blackbird costume was to weave long black feathers into a netted black fabric that would then be sewn onto a black body-hugging suit, like a feathered body wrap. This was going to require a lot of feather placing, affixing, and sewing, so Sam queued up some bluesy jazz and got to work. At 11:30 p.m., Sam startled when the phone rang. It was Noel. "Amber asked me out." "Well, good. I thought I was supposed to be doing the asking out. Have you ever heard of a woman's lib?" "Vaguely, but I come from a family of mere chauvinists. I'm still in the learning curve." "Well, what did you say to her?" Sam winced, stabbing his finger with the needle for the 100th time. "I said yes. I couldn't think fast enough to say anything else. Besides, I've decided her caboose might be as fine as Darla's." "Well, that's important. How's the costume coming?" "Good, I think. I should have it done by tomorrow afternoon, and we can work on the set." "Which is a tragedy," Noel complained. "The set? No working on it tomorrow. Tomorrow's a Saturday. Saturdays are for frolicking." "It's the only time we could get the shooting studio assigned to us," Sam reminded him. "A pity." Sam ignored him, hung up the phone, and returned to sewing feathers. A few hours later, he put the finishing touches on the costume, attaching to the head 2 beady yellow and black eyes and a tiny pointed orange beak. Even though he was exhausted, he donned the suit and stood in front of the full-length mirror behind the bathroom door. Sam nearly shrieked when he saw himself, because what he was looking at wasn't him anymore. It was so not him, he was tempted to tear off the suit and find himself again. He felt like his creation had assimilated him. He'd been transformed. He couldn't see any part of Sam. All he saw was a monster-sized Blackbird. His design had come out of just how he'd envisioned it. The oversized proportions made the suit look almost kid-friendly, but the wide, dead eyes and dripping midnight feathers were deeply unsettling. He had no doubt that poor Floyd, the character in their movie, would seriously regret his dark secrets when he came face to face with the Blackbird. Thanks to the massive quantity of feathers his dad got for him, Sam had been able to approximate the full belly shape of a blackbird. He'd fashioned the curve of the belly to come all the way down to below his knees, so the bird's legs started at his shins, conveying realistic proportions. His mom had helped him with the feet part of the costume. His mom, who loved all things crafty, found a pair of stretch-to-fit water shoes and extra large black tights with scale patterns. She also showed Sam how to shape the bird toes out of black rubber, into which he then carved deep grooves. Together, they used sculpting epoxy to create bird claws, which Sam inserted into the rubber toes. He attached the bird feet to the water shoes so it looked like the toes extended out naturally. At first glance, Sam was a huge blackbird, and he was beyond creepy. Now they just needed a little blood. Sam laughed. Maybe then Noel would shut up about the blood. Noel and Sam met Saturday afternoon to design their movie set. Noel would rather have been playing volleyball with his fraternity brothers, but in spite of his nonchalant posturing, film class mattered to him. Plus, he was stoked about their movie. When Noel arrived in the shooting studio, Sam immediately showed him a picture of the Blackbird suit. Noel was glad Sam wasn't looking at him when Noel first saw the picture. He was pretty sure he went pale. It felt like he'd gone pale. He'd suddenly gotten cold and weak and shaky. What the heck was happening? When Sam turned to ask Noel what he thought, Noel bent over and pretended to tie his shoe. It's rad. Above and beyond, dude. Yeah, thanks. I kinda freaked myself out when I looked in the mirror, Sam said. Noel rose, pretty sure his normal coloring was back. Leave it to Sam to admit he was freaked out. Sam had no clue how to be cool. He was too honest, too open, and too himself to get within sniffing distance of cool. Okay, so we're thinking bedroom, right? Sam stood in the middle of the set. Nightmares, night terrors, cold sweats, paranoid self-defense, panic phone calls. Yeah, I think it's the ultimate in a film for a one-room set. Noel pretended to speak into a megaphone. Step right up, folks. Get all your creep factor right here. One-stop shopping. Sam laughed while Noel grinned. Sam wasn't bad-looking when he laughed, Noel thought. Sam's problem was that he always looked so serious. With strong features, a wide mouth, and a sharp jawline, Sam usually came across as harsh and angry even when he wasn't. His face was like one of those carvings on totem poles. In fact, when Noel had met Sam at the beginning of the semester the previous year, he'd asked Sam if he was a totem pole. The dude was so tall, and he wore a lot of black, red, and tan. Do I have something on my face? Sam asked. Just your ugly mug. Noel gave Sam a playful punch to let Sam know he was kidding. Ah, come on, man. Sam tossed Noel a screwdriver. Let's get to work. Over the next 2 hours, they built furniture, hung pictures, made the bed, and argued about which personal and decor items went where and why. Sam seemed to have a particularly entrenched opinion about dirty socks. The movie is about airing your dirty laundry and what happens to you when you do. The dirty socks should have been a prominent place in the visual narrative, not just be tossed off to the side, Sam said. Noel held up his hands. I give. After another half hour, Noel was getting bored. So, Sam, what dark secrets could the Blackbird get out of you? Sam dropped the stack of magazines he was carrying as Noel laughed. Guilt much? Sam shook his head. Coincidence. Uh-huh. Noel looked at Sam. Well, I don't have any dark secrets, Sam said. The way he industriously cleaned up the magazines made Noel think Sam was hiding something. Oh, come on, dude, spill, Noel laughed. The secrets, not the magazines. Sam finished restacking the magazines, and he straightened. He looked down at Noel. Nothing to spill? What about you? Sam really is a nerd, Noel thought. He wasn't the kind of guy Noel usually hung out with, but Sam was a genius in film class. Always hitch your wagon to the best horse, Noel's grandfather used to say. Noel's grandfather was a multi-millionaire. Noel figured taking his grandfather's advice was pretty wise. Okay, Noel conceded. I'll tell you mine. He threw himself on the bed and put his hands behind his head. Hey, Sam said. Shoes. I borrowed that bedspread. Fine, Mom. Noel kicked off his shoes. Sam ignored him and started hanging curtains over a fake window. So, I'm not proud of this, Noel said. But was that true? Might it be possible, if he was really telling the truth about his dark secret, that he was a little proud of it? Well, if it's a dark secret, I don't know why you would be proud of it, Sam said. Okay, whatever. So when I was in junior high, I would have been maybe 12 or so, I guess. I was a bully. Sam turned around and gave Noel a long look. What do you mean? Sam asked. You know, a bully, Noel chuckled. A pretty ruthless bully, actually. Give me an example, Sam said. What was wrong with Sam's voice? It sounded stiff. Noel looked up at the ceiling and thought back. Well, you know, the usual. Basically, I called him as I saw him. Sam leaned against the wall and stared at Noel. I still don't get it. Noel sat up on the bed. Okay, so there was like this really awkward fat girl. She had all those weirdo habits, like she wouldn't look you in the eye, and she was always squeezing her hands together, and she had trouble talking. She didn't stutter, but she seemed to have trouble figuring out how to talk. She was just weird. She had funny facial expressions, and she wore the stupidest clothes I'd ever seen. I mean, it looked like she did all her shopping at thrift stores, and not the cool ones. Her clothes never matched and stuff, so I started calling her second hand, SH for short, and when she'd walk down the hall, I'd go, shh. It caught on. And pretty soon, everyone was doing it, Noel laughed. That was a riot, stuff like that. Oh, and then one time she came to school wearing these high-water pants. I mean, she looked so stupid. So my friends and I threw water in her face. Get it? High water? Noel laughed. And she wore those thick glasses and always looked like she was squinting to find her way. So I put a dead mole in her locker and asked her if she was grieving for her best friend. Noel guffawed. Sometimes he just cracked himself up. He looked at Sam. Sam wasn't laughing. Sam pulled out the chair they'd placed in front of the desk in Floyd's room. You really think that stuff is funny? Sam asked. Well, yeah, Noel said. Don't you? You have to admit it's clever stuff, right? Like, there was this one time I got like a bucket full of burrs. That took a while to do, too. It's not easy gathering burrs. But see, this girl's name was Christine Wilbur. I remember her name because of the burr thing. And she had this long, stringy hair that she never washed enough. So I figured I'd do burrs for Christine Wilbur. Get it? Burrs for Will Herb? It was an experiment. I wanted to see if burrs would stick to greasy hair. Of course, I had to have a control, so when I threw the burrs, I also met her friend Valerie. Valerie had frizzy hair that I was pretty sure she washed too much. And sure enough, the burrs stuck better on Valerie than they did on Christine. I'll never forget them standing there outside the school like a couple monkeys picking lice off each other, trying to get those burrs out of their hair. Now that was funny, Noel laughed. Sam shook his head. That's not funny. Noel raised an eyebrow but didn't stop laughing. Seriously, picture it. They're like two little monkeys. He pretended to be a monkey picking lice off another monkey. Sam frowned, stood up, and started pacing around the fake room. Noel leaned back on the bed again. He pulled out a pillow from under the bedspread and plumped it up. Hey, I just made that bed, Sam snapped. Chill, I'll fix it when I get up. Sam kept pacing, then he abruptly stopped. Unless you're blind, you have to have noticed I'm not a normal-looking guy, right? Noel tilted his head. You're tall, but so are a lot of my frat bros. They're tall and athletic, Sam said. I'm just tall. Okay. So when I was in junior high, I was already way too tall for my age, and my legs looked even longer than they do now because I was so skinny. So, guess what happened to me? Noel figured Sam was bullied, but he decided to wait and let Sam tell his story. Noel knew he could be an idiot, but he wasn't stupid. I was bullied basically from the time I entered first grade until I got my freshman year in high school. Then that year it stopped. But I can tell you that those jokes you think are so funny, they're not funny to the people on the receiving end of them. Sam crossed his arms and glared at Noel. Noel laughed. Dude, you look so like a totem pole right now. Or no, you look like one of those wooden Indian statues. Noel sat up, crossed his arms, and intoned. How? Noel fell back on the bed and laughed. Sam shook his head and looked around. And that's offensive. Let's just get this done, huh? Noel got off the bed. Still grinning, he remade the bed. Maybe not as neatly as Sam had done it, but it was made. And who said Floyd was compulsive about his bed anyways? You okay, dude? Noel asked. Sam was keeping his back to Noel. I'm good. Sam turned around and surveyed the room, not looking at Noel. I think we're done here. How about if we call it good for now, and I'll bring my costume from home tomorrow so we can start filming. You don't want to run through the lines now? You're the one who has lines. I thought you said you already knew them. I do. Well, then I'd say we're done. Sam stepped over to the bed and fixed Noel's messy bed-making job. Okay, Kimosabi. Noel chuckled. Sam flicked Noel a look that said, see you tomorrow, and strode out of the shooting studio. I might have gotten on one of that big dude's old nerves, Noel said to himself. Then he chuckled again. He really did crack himself up. Returning from his date that evening with Amber, Noel sauntered down the hall to his single room in the frat house, bopping his head in time to the music that vibrated the walls. The speakers were on the first floor, and this was the third, but his frat brothers were partying hard tonight. The whole house shook. It also smelled like beer, knockwurst, and unwashed laundry. He wrinkled his nose. Noel didn't mind the noise, but he didn't love the smell. Noel wouldn't have admitted that to anybody, but he wasn't really fraternity material. He'd pledged this frat because his dad and granddad had been members, and it had been assumed he'd be one too. But it was a cool frat, and Noel was all about doing what it took to be cool. So he was content, especially since he'd won the room lottery at the beginning of the year, which got him the best single room in the 3-story, 2-door mansion that housed the frat. The door Noel was strolling past flew open, and a muscular, rumpled guy with spiky black hair scratched his bare belly and squinted up at the bright hall lights. "What time is it?" he asked. "Almost midnight," Noel said. "You okay, Ian?" Ian was a football player, a dedicated one. He was always talking about treating his body as a temple and stuff like that. He liked to walk around in his boxers shorts, showing everyone just what an awesome temple it was. Noel thought Ian was a little bit full of himself, but he did find the guy's boxer shorts amusing. He had dozens of them, all in different colors and patterns. Tonight's boxers were white, and they were covered in bright yellow rubber ducks. Maybe it was the rubber ducks that made Noel notice Ian's gray, clay-like complexion and the dark smudges under his eyes. You don't expect someone wearing rubber ducks to look like they're terminally ill. "Oh, not sleeping lately, and now this." Ian waved a hand at the throbbing beat that still massaged the walls of the building. "The music keeps you awake?" "Yeah, don't it keep you awake?" "Nah, nothing keeps me awake." "Seriously?" "Seriously, I can sleep through pretty much anything." "I'm envious. I have trouble sleeping every night." "Must have a guilty conscience," Noel said. Ian's eyes widened. "What? Chill. Just kidding." Noel laughed and punched Ian on the cement he called an upper arm. Ian gave Noel a weak smile and stumbled across the hall to the bathroom. Noel rubbed his knuckles and headed down the hall to his room.